first attempts to date the round and rectangular zodiacs of Dendera date to the 19th century. The initial interpretation of their horoscopes had been suggested by the 19th-century Egyptologists, in particular, the famous German Egyptologist Heinrich Brugsch. It was instantly pointed out that all the planets except for the Sun and the Moon are represented as wayfarers carrying rods on the zodiacs of Dendera as well as many other Egyptian zodiacs. The rods symbolized planetary motion across the sphere of the immobile stars. Planets were considered to be mobile or wandering stars in ancient astronomy. Therefore, the planetary figures on Egyptian zodiacs are usually equipped with rods. The Sun and the Moon were represented as circles on Egyptian zodiacs, often containing figures. This is how they're represented on the zodiacs of Dendera. Based on the deciphering made by Egyptologists, many renowned astronomers of the 19th century such as Dupuy, Laplace, Fourier, Latran, Home, Biot and others, attempted to date the Dendera zodiacs. Their result proved negative. There were no planetary combinations resembling those from Dendera anywhere on the real sky over the entire period between Deep Antiquity and the 3rd century AD. There had been no calculations conducted at any latter point up. Nikolai Morozov employed his fundamental knowledge of the ancient astronomical symbols in order to verify the interpretation of the Dendera zodiacs as offered by the Egyptologists. In several cases, such as the case of Venus, he corrected some of the obvious errors inherent said interpretations. However, Morozov's approach to the deciphering of the Egyptian zodiacs remained incomplete. Research by Fomenko and Nosovsky demonstrates that he ignored or misinterpreted a great deal of astronomical data contained by the Egyptian zodiacs apart from the horoscope. The reason is that Morozov, likewise his predecessors, had been of the false opinion that the astronomical content of an Egyptian zodiac is exhausted by the horoscope contained therein. Unlike his predecessors, he knew better than to trust the Scaligerian chronology and the ancient Egyptian chronology thereby implied. Therefore, Morozov carried on with his calculations for epochs post-dating the 3rd century AD, coming up with what can only be considered a great solution in comparison to all the results of his predecessors. The rectangular zodiac of Dendera, May 6, 540 AD. The round zodiac of Dendera, March 15, 568 AD. However, Morozov's solution was far from ideally strict. It contained a number of imprecise postulations that seemed tiny, but proved to affect the end result to a substantial extent. Nikolai Kellin and Denis Denisenko carried on with Morozov's studies in the field of the astronomical dating of the Dendera zodiacs. Kellin and Denisenko widened the interval to include all epochs from 1300 to the present. They were using the same interpretation of the Dendera zodiacs as Morozov, trusting him completely in this respect. However, unlike Morozov, Kellin and Denisenko were able to use a computer for their calculations. As a result, another solution for the zodiacs of Dendera as deciphered by Morozov was found. The rectangular zodiac of Dendera, May 12, 1394 AD. The round zodiac of Dendera, March 22, 1422 AD. The solution offered by Kellin and Denisenko turned out even better than Morozov's, for both zodiacs, the round and the rectangular. However, their solution for the round zodiac did in fact contain a certain error. Thus, there was no ideal solution found for the zodiacs of Dendera in strictly Morozovian interpretation. Indeed, it turns out that there is no such solution. Let us recall that, according to Morozov, a star above the head of a planetary symbol on the Dendera zodiacs is an indication of this planet's visibility. In other words, it is a sign that the planet in question could be seen with the naked eye at dawn or at dusk. On the other hand, the absence of stars near planetary figures, at least the ones drawn within immediate vicinity of the Sun, means that the planet in question was not visible on the date ciphered in the horoscope. For the planets located at a certain distance from the Sun, the star sign could be omitted since the very distance between the Sun and the planet in question would testify to the visibility of the planet in question on the sky. Indications of a planet's visibility or a lack thereof are of the utmost importance for Venus and Mercury. They are close to the Sun, and become invisible due to solar rays every now and then. If one of these planets is specified as visible on the zodiac and it isn't such in the calculated solution or vice versa, the solution in question has to be rejected. The approach of the authors of the New Chronology to the problem of planetary visibility signs on the Egyptian zodiacs is as follows. One has to bear in mind that it is the furthest thing from obvious a priori which author was correct, Morozov in his presumption that Egyptian zodiacs contain indications of planetary visibility, or Tatiana Fomenko who did not account for such indications. Therefore, we shall tentatively consider Morozov's hypothesis to be correct and account for it in our attempts to find such solutions for the Egyptian zodiacs that we know as would conform to the following specifications. First, they must be ideal according to the requirements, meaning they must closely match the Egyptian zodiac in terms of planetary dispositions in the constellations and their order. Secondly, Morozov's visibility indicators must also be taken into account. However, the stipulations do not end here, and also include rigid correspondence to all the additional astronomical information that was found on the zodiacs. However, we shall not just consider the best zodiacal interpretation, but all of them at once. If one really finds such solutions for the Egyptian zodiacs, ones that will be ideal in every sense as described above, it will mean that Morozov had been correct in this particular instant, which indeed proves to be the case, according to the results of the calculations. Morozov's opinion on the visibility criterion was confirmed fully. A detailed study of the Dendera zodiacs by Fomenko and Nosovsky demonstrated that apart from the primary horoscopes considered in the above-mentioned research, they contain rather detailed horoscopes of a more special nature. These yield additional astronomical information that gives the opportunity to calculate all possible interpretation versions simultaneously. Such volume of extra data renders the chance of a random solution almost non-existent. These are the reproductions of both zodiacs with groups of symbols that contain astronomical information that supplements the primary horoscopes and allows for a more precise dating. A detailed analysis of the Dendera zodiacs using the new method will be presented later. The astronomical solution to the Dendera zodiacs discovered by Fomenko and Nosovsky turned out to be the only one for the entire historical interval between 500 BC and the present epoch. It is as follows. The rectangular zodiac of Dendera, April 22–26, 1168 AD. The round zodiac of Dendera, morning of March 20, 1185 AD. The Egyptian town of Esna is located rather close to Dendera. This is the place where the Nile makes a great curve that spans a huge bight covered in hills with many ancient Egyptian royal sepulchral caves carved into the rock. The city of Luxor is right across the Nile, which historians believe to be the ancient Thebes. Two temples with zodiacs on their ceilings were found in Esna. In the works on the New Chronology, these temples are referred to as the Greater Temple and the Lesser Temple, since one of them is a lot bigger than the other. The zodiacs from the temples of Esna resemble the zodiacs of Dendera in the symbols they contain. Ordinary representatives of the nobility would get zodiacs on the inside of their coffins. Great kings could have entire temples built to house their funeral zodiacs, which would be chiseled on the ceiling. Furthermore, some of the monumental funeral zodiacs from the ancient Egypt could bear some relation to Christ, his kin or the apostles. As we understand now, the ancient Egypt had been a Christian country. It was discovered that the zodiacs of Esna, likewise the Dendera zodiacs, contain detailed horoscopes of a secondary nature. In other words, a large volume of extra astronomical information in the Esna zodiacs has been discovered. This information excludes the possibility of finding a random and extraneous solution on the entire historical interval, even considering that all possible zodiac interpretation options are accounted for, in calculation. A detailed analysis of the zodiac deciphering will be presented later. We shall merely quote the solution obtained by Fomenko and Nosovsky. The Greater Zodiac of Esna, March 31 to April 3, 1394 AD. The Lesser Zodiac of Esna, May 6 to 8, 1404 AD. This solution is unique for the entire historical interval between 500 BC and the present epoch. In 1901, in Upper Egypt near Sohag, Flinders Petrie discovered an artificial burial cave, the walls of which were covered with paintings and inscriptions, and on the ceiling 2 horoscopes were drawn and painted in various colors, merging into a single composition. The Athribis zodiacs of Flinders Petrie were studied by Nikolai Morozov. However, there is an aspect in Morozov's research that greatly hindered him in the deciphering of the Egyptian zodiacs. Namely, when faced with the symbols that he deemed to bear no relation to the horoscope of the zodiac in question, Morozov would have no hesitation about declaring them to be of a religious or mystical nature, and with zero relevance to astronomy. In this case, for instance, he misinterpreted important astronomical information from the Athribis zodiacs as religious symbolism, namely, the signs of the secondary summer solstice zodiac. The planetary figures of birds from the secondary horoscope were declared to represent the souls of the deceased father and son erroneously, despite the fact that Morozov himself made the perfectly justified assertions that the birds found on the zodiacs of Athribis stand for planets. And that is indeed the case. In this particular case, Morozov's error, stemming from his having confused the secondary horoscope for a mystical scene, proved to be serious. Firstly, he had lost important astronomical information bearing direct relation to the dating. Secondly, Morozov's erroneous interpretation of the Egyptian symbols confirmed his false presumption that the maximal interval between the 2 Athribis datings should equal 30 years. In reality, this interval equals 38 years, as we shall see later. At the same time, Morozov's assumption that the Athribis zodiacs stand for the demise dates of the father and son buried in this cave, appears to be correct. Having discovered no satisfactory solution, Morozov was forced to revise his interpretation of the Athribis zodiacs and introduce certain corrections into it. Namely, to make Jupiter and Saturn swap their respective positions. The new interpretation yielded 1049 AD as the solution for the upper zodiac and 1065 AD for the lower. However, his solution was far from ideal. In their analysis of the Athribis zodiacs, Fomenko and Nosovsky have tried every single option of identifying the Athribis birds as planets uniformly. Apart from that, they have used additional astronomical information from the secondary summer solstice horoscope contained in the lower zodiac. We shall just quote the end result reached by them, which happens to be unique for the entire historical interval between 500 BC and the present. That solution is as follows. The upper zodiac of Athribis, May 15 to 16, 1230 AD. The lower zodiac of Athribis, February 9 to 10, 1268 AD. The Theban zodiac of Brugsch was described and studied by Nikolai Morozov. A drawn copy of this zodiac made by Brugsch himself can be seen here. The names of the planets are written explicitly between the constellation figures. Therefore, the interpretation of this horoscope presents no particular problems. Morozov had studied the issue of the horoscope's dating with the utmost care. We must point out that Morozov only managed to find a single horoscope in this zodiac, namely, the one transcribed in demotic symbols. However, the analysis of Brugsch's zodiac made by Fomenko and Nosovsky demonstrates that it contains two more horoscopes, which were overlooked by Morozov. Unlike the demotic horoscope, they are part of the actual zodiac and not mere subscripts. It is odd that neither Brugsch nor Morozov happened to notice it. However, Morozov proceeds to admit candidly that his solution of 1682 is far from being the only one. Although Morozov had tried to prove that his second solution is a great deal worse than the first one, a closer study reveals the fact that both defects that he brings to our attention happen to be beyond the precision threshold of the Egyptian drawing, and are thus completely uninformative. The dating of the second, ideal solution of the demotic horoscope, obtained by Fomenko and Nosovsky, is 1861 AD, which predates 1862, the year of Brugsch's publication by a single year. The dating falls on the second part of the 19th century, no less. It is now obvious why Morozov would reject this solution as absurd. Indeed, in such circumstances we would most probably also have chosen the 1682 solution, although it is worse from the astronomical point of view. However, further analysis of Brugsch's zodiac reveals many other interesting details. The matter is that Fomenko and Nosovsky have discovered two more full primary horoscopes in Brugsch's zodiac, and ones that serve as an integral part of the zodiac itself. And the demotic horoscope was most likely added at a later time. One of the new horoscopes in Brugsch's zodiac is located on the left, the same side as the demotic subscripts, but closer to the edge of the zodiac. The second horoscope is on its opposite, on the right. All the planetary figures of the second horoscope stand in boats, so we shall simply refer to it as the boat horoscope. All the planetary figures of the first horoscopes were drawn without rods, possibly in order to avoid confusion with the boat horoscope. We shall therefore be referring to the first horoscope as the horoscope without rods. This is a drawn copy of Brugsch's zodiac with three horoscopes pointed out explicitly, the demotic horoscope dated by Morozov as well as the two original ones that escaped the attention of both Morozov and Brugsch. Both the boat horoscope, and the horoscope without rods from Brugsch's zodiac, only have a single pair of solutions close to each other. Namely, October 6–7, 1841 for one of them, and February 15, 1853 for the other. The two horoscopes on the coffin lid may have referred to the dates of birth and death of whoever was buried there, apparently, a boy or a girl of 12 years. However, this implies that the demotic horoscope refers to a 19th century date and not a 17th century one, since it was added somewhat later. It turns out, Morozov's second solution, the one he rejected on the grounds of its being too recent, is in fact the correct one. Whereas the first solution of 1682 is too early. One gets the impression that what was presented to Brugsch as an ancient sepulchre had been a freshly made coffin that couldn't have been older than a mere couple of years. Morozov had every right to be surprised about the fact that this coffin looked just like new. One could assume that in the 19th century Egypt, the old Mameluke burial traditions were still observed in some of the families. Bear in mind that the Mamelukes in Egypt had been wiped out as late as 1811, or a mere 40 years before Brugsch's zodiac was manufactured, 1853, according to the horoscope. It appears that the tradition of burying the dead in the old Egyptian fashion had been kept alive by patriarchal Mameluke families for a considerable amount of time. The wooden coffin featured an old-fashioned zodiac painted on the lid, depicting the deceased's birth and death dates. The coffin would then be hidden, and efforts were made to keep it safe from thieves. But this wouldn't always succeed, since rich European collectors paid hefty sums of money for such coffins if they were presented as exceptionally ancient. Most likely, that was the case with the coffin studied by Brugsch. It is most likely to have been stolen shortly after the burial and instantly sold, to be shown to Brugsch in 1857. Someone must have scribbled a horoscope for 1861 on the coffin lid in jest. It is clear why the hoaxer would use demotic script for the horoscope. He would need nothing for this purpose except for a fitting book on Egyptology, or a mere dictionary. Demotic script was deciphered by Ackerblad as early as in 1802. Thus, the forger must have been a contemporary of Brugsch. Both used the same dictionary in order to write the cryptic inscription and to decipher it a year or two later. One should hardly ascribe the subscript authorship to Brugsch himself, the way Morozov does, although jocularly. It is also possible that the horoscope was compiled for a future date several years in advance. Thus, Brugsch may already have seen the subscripts in 1857, which he claims to be the date of his first acquaintance with the zodiac in question. Astronomical calculations necessary for this purpose did not present a problem in that epoch, since it was already the second half of the 19th century. Thus, Morozov's solution for the Brugsch zodiac is as follows. The horoscope of demotic subscripts, November 17, 1682 AD. The solution of November 18, 1861 AD had been found, but rejected. Horoscope without rods was not found. Boat horoscope was not found. Fomenko and Nosovsky's solution for the Brugsch zodiac. The horoscope of demotic subscripts, November 18, 1861 AD. Horoscope without rods, October 6–7, 1841 AD. Boat horoscope, February 15, 1853 AD.